The boardroom on the 80th floor of Croft Enterprises was a place of silent, oppressive power. It wasn't just the view, a godlike panorama of the city sprawling into the haze, but the air itself, filtered, chilled, and utterly devoid of humanity. The mahogany table was a dark mirror stretching 30 feet, reflecting the steel and glass of the skyline like a captive, flattened world. On this particular morning, two kinds of work were being done in that room: the creation of an empire and the erasure of a human being. Amina was the human being. Her presence was a study in practiced self-effacement. Dressed in the crisp but featureless gray uniform of the building's maintenance staff, she moved along the edges of the room with the fluid silence of a shadow. Her cart, a mobile island of stainless steel and neatly organized supplies, glided over the plush carpet without a whisper. Every movement was efficient, honed by years of navigating spaces where she was meant to be functional but unseen. The soft shush of her microfiber cloth against the vast windows was the only sound she permitted herself to make. She had mastered the art of being invisible, of occupying space without presence. It was a survival skill. At the head of the table, Julian Croft Jr. paced like a caged predator. He was the opposite of Amina, all presence, all noise. The heir to the Croft empire, he wore a suit so sharply tailored it seemed weaponized. His voice, amplified by the room's acoustics, was a boom of rehearsed confidence, a torrent of words meant to convey dominance. "This isn't a merger, it's a paradigm shift," he declared to an imaginary audience, his reflection striding alongside him in the polished mahogany. "We're not just acquiring assets. We are synergizing a new global local infrastructure that will redefine the market for the next century." Amina kept her back to him, her focus pinned to a non-existent smudge on the glass. She had learned long ago that direct eye contact was a form of intrusion, an assertion of self she could not afford. Julian and the two junior executives hovering nervously by the door were the players on the stage. She was merely part of the set design, a detail to be overlooked. Julian's energy was frantic, a volatile mix of arrogance and deep-seated insecurity. He was performing for his father's ghost, for the board members who would soon fill these chairs, for anyone and everyone who might still doubt his readiness to inherit the throne. In a flourish of theatrical passion, he threw his arms wide, mimicking the global reach he was describing. The gesture was too large, too uncontrolled. The back of his hand caught a leather-bound folder perched precariously on the edge of the table. It fell with a soft, expensive thud, spilling its contents. Papers, crisp and white, fanned out across the dark carpet like fallen leaves. One sheet, heavier than the rest, slid further than the others, coming to a stop just inches from the toe of Amina's sensible, rubber-soled shoe. Amina froze. Every instinct, every rule of her carefully constructed invisibility screamed at her to do nothing. He was the prince. He would retrieve his own papers. Waiting was the correct response. Waiting was safe. But a deeper, older part of her, a part that valued order and abhorred carelessness, stirred. It was the part of her that had once commanded rooms like this, a part she had buried under years of quiet servitude. Before she could stop herself, she turned, took a half-step forward and bent at the waist in a single, fluid motion. Her fingers, long and nimble, reached for the edge of the stray document. She never touched it. "Don't touch that." Julian's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room's hushed atmosphere like a razor. It was sharp, cold, and dripping with contempt. Amina's hand recoiled as if burned. She slowly straightened up, her eyes fixed on the floor. He strode over to her, his polished Italian shoes stopping beside her worn work ones. He didn't look at her face. He looked down at her, a man observing an inconvenient piece of furniture. He bent, snatched the paper from the floor, and then, as he rose, he finally met her gaze. His eyes were Arctic blue, devoid of warmth or recognition. "Your job," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more humiliating than a shout, "is to handle the trash, not the company's future." The two executives by the door exchanged a barely suppressed smirk. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was a silence that confirmed her status, that hammered home the unbridgeable chasm between his world and hers. Amina held his gaze for a fraction of a second longer than she should have. In that moment, her face remained a mask of placid neutrality, an expression she had perfected until it was second nature. But behind the mask, inside her chest, a switch was flipped. It was a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a very long time, a hot, sharp coil of righteous anger. She gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, turned without a word and walked back to her cart. The squeak of one of its wheels, a tiny imperfection she'd meant to fix, sounded thunderous in the charged stillness of the room. As she pushed the cart toward the exit, a quiet thought echoed in the new, ringing silence of her mind. Imagine standing there, your dignity flayed with a few careless words spoken as if you weren't even human. Would you endure this? She would. For now. But as the heavy oak door swung shut behind her, the reflection in the polished brass showed not the face of a maid, but the cool, calculating expression of a woman who had just been handed a reason to remember who she used to be. The game had begun. Julian Croft, Jr., just didn't know he was playing. An hour later, the misjudgment sharpened from a casual slight into a deliberate public wound. Julian, buoyed by his own perceived brilliance, needed an audience. He and his junior executives were reviewing schematics on a smartboard when Amina re-entered to collect the trash bins. He saw her, and a cruel smile played on his lips. "Gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying an edge of mock gravity. "A lesson in corporate structure." He gestured toward Amina with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "At the top, you have visionaries, strategists, closers." He tapped his own chest. "People who build the future. And at the bottom, you have infrastructure." He paused for effect. "The ones who keep the lights on and wipe things clean." Both are necessary, but never, ever confuse their roles. The executives chuckled, a sycophantic sound that echoed off the glass walls. Amina did not look at them. She moved with a deliberate, almost serene grace, her focus entirely on her task. She emptied a small bin from under a side table, the rustle of paper the only sound she made. She was a ghost again, a function, not a person. But this time, the invisibility felt different. It felt like a disguise. Her final stop was the large, elegant waste receptacle near Julian's end of the table. Inside, nestled amongst discarded printouts and coffee cups, was the folder he had dropped. The leather was scuffed from the fall, a minor imperfection that likely offended his sense of order. He had thrown the entire draft away. It was trash now, officially designated as her domain. As her gloved hands lifted the bag, she could feel the slight, reassuring weight of the folder within. This document, this key to a multi-billion-dollar deal, was now hers to handle. Julian's arrogance had delivered the company's future directly into her hands. The irony was so thick she could almost taste it. She tied the bag with a neat, practiced knot. Her expression was unchanged, a perfect mask of quiet deference. No one saw the glint in her eyes. No one saw the flicker of a plan beginning to form behind the placid facade of the cleaning lady. She wheeled her cart out, the weight of the discarded draft a secret anchor in a sea of refuse. In the service hallway, under the flat, unforgiving glare of fluorescent lights, she paused. With methodical care, she opened the bag and retrieved the folder. She slipped it into a hidden compartment inside her cart, a space meant for her personal effects. The folder, which moments ago was a symbol of Julian's power, was now a symbolic object of another kind, a discarded truth, waiting for someone to see its value. She closed the compartment, the soft click of the latch sealing the transfer of power. The work of being invisible was done for the day. Now, the work of being seen was about to begin. Later that afternoon, Amina was polishing the brass fixtures in the main lobby, a meditative task that allowed her mind to work. The building was a symphony of controlled chaos, executives and assistants flowing like a river of ambition around her island of stillness. It was then that she saw Julian again. He was striding through the lobby, phone pressed to his ear, his voice a triumphant boom that turned heads. "It's done," he crowed, oblivious to the people around him. "The signing ceremony is confirmed. 10 a.m. sharp. Dad's finally letting me take the lead." A predatory grin split his face. He's so focused on the indemnity clauses he hasn't even looked at the Arabic translation of Clause 12. Their own lawyers signed off on it. He let out a short, sharp laugh. "They'll never see it coming. 90 days after we sign, the real fun begins." The words hit Amina with the force of a physical blow. 10 a.m. tomorrow. The timeline was no longer abstract, it was a ticking clock. Clause 12. He had named the weapon. They'll never see it coming. He had confessed the intent. This was the moment the conflict became inescapable. It was no longer a matter of professional pride or personal humiliation. This was a deliberate act of corporate sabotage, a son's betrayal of his father, wrapped in the elegant complexities of international law. The stakes were no longer just about her dignity. They were about the legacy of the entire company, the jobs of thousands of employees, and the profound ethical breach at the heart of it all. She could walk away. She could get on the train, go home to her small, quiet apartment, and forget everything she had heard. She could protect her hard-won peace, her anonymity. But the woman she used to be, the woman who had mediated disputes between warring corporations, the woman whose name was once synonymous with integrity in Cairo's legal circles, would not allow it. Julian's arrogant words were a cage, and they had just slammed shut. She was locked in. What would you do next? Would you risk everything for a company that saw you as less than human, for a man who didn't even know your name? Amina felt the weight of that question settle in her bones. She finished polishing the final brass handle, her reflection staring back at her, a woman in a gray uniform, a ghost in the machine. But the reflection's eyes were hard, resolute. The ghost had found a cause. The deadline was set. The no-way-back incident had just played out in the open, and she was the only one who understood the true sound of the starting gun. The staff locker room was a world away from the 80th floor. It was a cramped, utilitarian space in the building's basement, smelling of disinfectant and damp coats. Here, hierarchies were temporarily dissolved, replaced by the simple camaraderie of people who did the building's unseen work. It was Amina's sanctuary. She sat on a hard plastic bench under a flickering fluorescent light and pulled the leather folder from her bag. She smoothed out the crumpled pages of the contract draft, her touch gentle, reverent. Her fingers, so adept at cleaning, moved with a different kind of precision now, tracing the intricate lines of the Arabic script. The familiar curves and dots of the language were a balm to her, a connection to a part of herself she had kept hidden for years. Just then, Leo, the young intern Julian had belittled, walked in. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He was tossing a crumpled report into his locker when he saw her. He stopped, his gaze falling on the complex legal document spread across her lap. He started to make a comment, something dismissive, something he'd learned from his superiors about the clear lines between their world and hers. "Big plans for the weekend," he might have said, a joke about the janitor reading a $1 billion contract. But the words died in his throat. He saw not just that she was looking at the document, but how she was looking at it. Her brow was furrowed in deep concentration. Her finger wasn't just on the page, it was moving, tracing the flow of the Arabic text from right to left with a fluid, unconscious familiarity. He saw her lips move silently, forming words he didn't recognize. This was not idle curiosity. This was fluency. This was comprehension. He saw the moment her expression shifted. The concentration melted away, replaced by a sudden, sharp intake of breath. Her eyes widened, not in confusion, but in dawning, horrified understanding. She had found it, the poison pill. The trap. Leo stood there, frozen, a witness to a silent, profound revelation. The woman he knew as a quiet background presence had just transformed before his eyes. The tired cleaner was gone, replaced by an expert, a scholar, a person of immense hidden depth. He didn't know what she had discovered, but he knew with absolute certainty that it was real. In the dingy basement locker room, far from the mahogany tables and skyline views, he had just seen the first glimpse of Amina's quiet, devastating competence, and he knew he could not ignore it. The opportunity for their silent alliance to be forged in words came the next morning. The office was buzzing with pre-signing tension. Julian was in rare form, barking orders, his temper a storm front moving through the executive suite. Leo was his primary target. The press kits for the Saudi delegation are wrong. Julian roared, slamming a glossy folder onto Leo's cluttered desk. The market projections are from Q2, not Q3. You have any idea how incompetent this makes us look? Leo stammered, his face pale. But sir, I used the file you sent me yesterday. the one labeled Final Press Kit Assets. "Don't make excuses," Julian snapped. "Just fix it. Now." He stormed off, leaving Leo trembling on the verge of being made the public scapegoat for his boss's own disorganization. Amina was nearby, wiping down the baseboards, a task that allowed her to be present but ignored. She had seen the whole exchange. A few minutes later, as Leo frantically tried to find the correct files, she approached his desk, her cart gliding to a silent stop beside him. She didn't speak. She simply placed a small, folded cleaning cloth on his desk. On it, she had written a short string of characters with a dry erase marker from her cart: // corp server / archive / temp JJC2A8 FPPTX. Leo stared at the cryptic line. It looked like a server path, but the ~temp and the alphanumeric string suggested a hidden or temporary file. "Check the server's recovery cache for Julian's personal device," Amina said, her voice barely a whisper. "The file system automatically saves shadow copies. Look for any PowerPoint file created or modified by him between 4 and 5 p.m. yesterday. That string is the likely file signature." It was a highly specific piece of technical advice, a detail rooted in a deep understanding of enterprise-level IT infrastructure. It was not something a janitor should know. Leo looked from the note to her face. He saw no pride, no "I told you so," only calm, supportive confidence. He typed the path into his search bar. A recovery prompt appeared. He followed her instructions, filtering by user and time. And there it was, a file named Final Kit V2 Use This One PPTX, saved 30 minutes after Julian had sent Leo the outdated version. It was irrefutable, time-stamped proof. Julian had made the mistake and was now trying to bury it under Leo's career. Leo downloaded the correct file, his hands shaking with a mixture of relief and adrenaline. He looked up at Amina, who was already turning away, her work at his desk done. "How?" he began, his voice choked with emotion. "Everyone makes mistakes," she said softly without looking back. "Not everyone takes responsibility." In that moment, she hadn't just saved him from a reprimand. She had armed him with the truth. She had treated him with respect. The bond, forged in a shared moment of Julian's contempt, was now sealed. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that he could trust this woman with anything. During the lunch hour, when the executive floor was a ghost town, Leo found Amina in an empty conference room, meticulously rearranging the chairs to perfect alignment. He closed the door behind him, the quiet click echoing in the large space. "He almost fired me," Leo said, his voice low. "If it wasn't for you." Amina paused her work, turning to face him fully. "He is a man who builds his strength on the perceived weakness of others," she stated, not as an insult but as a calm diagnosis. "It is an unstable foundation." "What did you see in that contract?" Leo asked, the question that had been burning in his mind since the locker room. "The one he threw away." Amina walked to the whiteboard, picked up a black marker, and in a few swift, elegant strokes drew 2 columns. At the top of one, she wrote English Clause 12. At the top of the other, Arabic Clause 12. "The English version is a smokescreen," she began, her voice taking on a new tone, the crisp, authoritative cadence of a lecturer, a lawyer. "It outlines a standard 10-year profit-sharing agreement. It's designed to pass a cursory review by any non-Arabic-speaking lawyer. It looks good. It looks safe." Under the English column, she wrote profit share and partnership. "But in international contract law," she continued, "the designated language of authority is paramount. In this deal, to show respect to the Saudi partners, the designated language is Arabic. The English text is legally considered a mere translation, a courtesy. If there is any discrepancy, the Arabic version is the one that is binding in any court, in any arbitration." She moved to the second column. "The Arabic version contains a subordinate clause, a rider. It's buried in dense, formal language, but its meaning is absolute." She wrote on the board, first in flawless Arabic script, then the English translation directly below it. "In damage al-usul al-siyadia bid al-muafakat al-tanzimia, sovereign asset transfer upon regulatory approval." Leo stared at the words, his blood running cold. Sovereign asset transfer, that's not a partnership. It's an acquisition. Amina finished for him, her voice grim. It's a corporate Trojan horse. Julian has structured the deal so that 90 days after the signing, the exact amount of time it will take for a specific international trade regulation to be approved, the Croft subsidiary involved in the merger will be automatically and legally transferred, in its entirety, to the Saudi conglomerate. Not as a partner, but as property. She capped the marker, the click sounding like a gavel. He's not merging a part of the company, she said, her eyes meeting Leo's. He's selling it out from under his own father, likely for a massive personal payout that's hidden in a separate agreement. This isn't a business deal, it's a heist. The trap was no longer a suspicion. It was a clear, terrifying blueprint laid bare on the whiteboard in the silent room. Armed with this devastating knowledge, Leo felt a surge of naive courage. He couldn't go straight to Arthur Croft SR, but he could raise a flag. He approached a mid-level vice president in the legal department, a man named Henderson, who had always seemed reasonable. He tried to be discreet, mentioning a potential translation discrepancy in the merger documents and suggesting a final review. Henderson, a man whose career was built on not rocking the boat, saw only risk. He smiled placatingly at Leo, then, as soon as the intern was gone, went straight to Julian. The retribution was swift and brutal. Julian found Amina in the service corridor of the sub-level parking garage, a place of concrete and shadows. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The menace radiated from him, a palpable cold. "You," he began, cornering her between her cart and a damp concrete wall. "You think you're clever." Amina stood her ground, her expression unreadable. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he hissed, stepping closer. "You're a cleaner. A foreign worker on a visa I can have revoked with a single phone call. You think you can whisper your little conspiracy theories to an intern and bring me down?" He laughed, a humorless, ugly sound. "Who do you think my father will believe? His son, his heir, or the woman who mops his floors?" He leaned in, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Your security clearance to the executive floors is gone, effective immediately. If I see you above the lobby level again, I will have you arrested for trespassing. Stay away from my office. Stay away from my staff. And most of all, stay away from my deal." He straightened up, adjusting his tie. "You are a ghost in this building. I suggest you start acting like one." He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous garage. The threat was absolute. Her job, her visa, her very presence in the country. He had threatened it all. She was completely isolated, her one small channel to the truth now severed. The system, in the form of Julian, had pushed back hard. If that happened to you, what would you do? Would you back down, silenced by fear? Or would you find another way? Amina stood alone in the dim light, the smell of exhaust fumes and damp concrete filling her lungs. A near break was what Julian expected. What he got was a quiet, unbreakable vow. He had mistaken her silence for weakness. He was about to learn that it was simply the calm before the storm. The hours that followed were a long, dark night of the soul. Amina went through the motions of her shift, her mind a whirlwind of strategy and risk. Julian had built a fortress around himself, and she was on the outside, stripped of access and credibility. By morning, it would all be over. She was out of time. All seemed lost. But in the quietest hour just before dawn, a plan emerged. It was audacious, incredibly risky, and relied on the very system that had been designed to keep her down. She would not fight Julian's power. She would use it against him. She left the Croft building on her break and walked 3 blocks to a 24-hour public library. Sitting at a nondescript computer terminal, she logged in as a guest. She navigated to a secure, anonymous email service and composed a message. The recipient was Acroft Priv at Croft Enterprises.com, Arthur Croft SR. S private, confidential email address, an address she had once seen on a discarded memo. The message contained only one line: "Ask your son to read Clause 12 aloud." In Arabic, no signature, no explanation, just a single curiosity-piquing command, a seed of doubt planted in the only mind that mattered. She returned to the building just as the city was beginning to wake up. The final piece of her plan depended on Leo. She found him in the lobby, his face etched with anxiety. He had been warned to stay away from her, and he was visibly terrified. Amina approached him, her expression calm and reassuring. She pressed the crumpled, leather-bound contract draft into his hands. It was the same one Julian had thrown in the trash, the symbolic object of her humiliation. "Give this to Arthur Croft's executive assistant, Miss Gable," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Tell her it's a courtesy copy of the final draft for her records. She's meticulous. She'll compare it against the official version on the table. She will see the discrepancy." Leo looked at the folder as if it were a bomb. "They'll fire me." "They will," Amina agreed, her eyes holding his. "But you will have done the right thing. Courage is not the absence of fear, Leo. It is acting in spite of it." She looked toward the elevators, where the immaculately dressed Saudi delegation was now arriving, greeted by a beaming Julian and his father. The signing was minutes away. "The proving ground. I have to go," she said. She picked up her mop and bucket, her simple tools, her passport to the places she was no longer allowed to be. She walked not toward the service elevator, but toward the main executive elevator bank, knowing her access card would be denied, knowing security would be called. She was counting on it. She was no longer trying to be invisible. She was about to make herself the center of the storm. The boardroom was a tableau of corporate power. The Saudi delegates sat on one side of the vast mahogany table, their quiet dignity a stark contrast to Julian's slick, restless energy. Arthur Croft, SR, sat at the head, a patriarch presiding over the culmination of a legacy. Pens, heavy and gold, were laid out on the table, poised over the signature lines of the pristine official contracts. As Julian launched into his final, congratulatory remarks, Arthur SR felt a prickle of unease. The anonymous email was a splinter in his mind. It was likely nothing, a prank, corporate espionage, but it was specific. It was confident. Then moments ago, his assistant of 30 years, the unflappable Miss Gable, had approached him, her face pale, holding a scuffed, unofficial-looking draft next to the official copy, whispering about a significant discrepancy in Clause 12. "And so, with these signatures, we forge a new future of global partnership," Julian concluded, his smile wide and triumphant. He gestured to the pens. "One moment," Arthur SR said. His voice, though quiet, commanded the room. All eyes turned to him. "Julian, a point of clarification before we sign. A formality." Julian's smile tightened. "Of course, Father." "Please read Clause 12 for our partners," Arthur said, his eyes unblinking. Julian visibly relaxed. "Certainly. Clause 12 stipulates a 10-year framework for mutual profit sharing governed by the laws of the state of New York." "In Arabic," Arthur interrupted, his voice like stone. The color drained from Julian's face. "Father, I don't think that's necessary. It's a direct translation. Our legal teams have read it," Arthur commanded. Panic flickered in Julian's eyes. He picked up the contract, his hands trembling slightly. He stared at the elegant, flowing script, a language he could not speak, let alone read. He began to stammer, trying to dismiss it, to laugh it off as an unnecessary delay. It was at that precise moment of excruciating silence that a commotion was heard at the boardroom door. 2 security guards were blocking someone from entering. "Ma'am, you're not authorized on this floor," one of them said firmly, and then a voice, calm and clear and utterly unexpected, floated into the room. "Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you." The Saudi delegates turned in their chairs, their faces masks of surprise. It was perfect classical Arabic, spoken with the accent of a scholar. Julian's head snapped toward the door. "Get her out of here," he snarled. But his father, his face a thundercloud of dawning suspicion, rose to his feet. He looked past his floundering son, past the guards, to the woman in the simple gray uniform standing in the doorway. He saw the quiet dignity in her posture, the intelligence in her eyes. He saw the truth. "Let her in," Arthur Croft SR bellowed, his voice shaking the room. "Let her speak." The guards stepped aside. Amina walked into the boardroom. She did not look at Julian. She walked directly to the head of the table, her worn work shoes silent on the expensive carpet. The entire room, billionaires, executives, lawyers, was frozen, watching the cleaning lady. Did you feel that shift? That sudden, breathtaking transfer of power? She picked up the official contract. Her eyes scanned the page for a moment, then she began to read. The Arabic flowed from her, not just recited but spoken with a nuanced understanding that conveyed its full legal weight. When she finished, a hush fell over the room. Then she looked directly at the lead Saudi delegate and then at Arthur Croft, SR. She gave them the stark, brutal English translation. "It says," she announced, her voice steady and strong, 90 days following the approval of International Regulatory Body SA7. All assets of the Croft Global subsidiary, including intellectual property and physical holdings, will be transferred to the sovereign ownership of the signing partner, superseding all previous agreements. It is not a partnership clause, it is a surrender clause. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of an empire cracking. It was the sound of a son's utter and complete ruin. And it was the sound of a woman, once invisible, finally, irrevocably being seen. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The boardroom, a moment ago a stage for triumph, became a chamber of cold fury. The lead Saudi delegate rose, gave Amina a short, respectful bow, and led his team from the room without a single backward glance at the Crofts. The deal was not just dead, it was poison. Julian stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. Arthur Croft, SR, didn't shout. His voice was a low, chilling whisper. "Security," he said, and 2 guards materialized, taking Julian by the arms. "Escort my son from the building. Revoke his access, all of it." As he was led away, a broken man, Julian's eyes met Amina's. In them, she saw not hatred, but the hollowed-out shock of a man whose world had just been dismantled by the person he considered less than dust. In the chaotic silence that followed, Arthur Croft, SR, turned to Amina. His face, aged a decade in 10 minutes, was a complex tapestry of gratitude, shame, and awe. "I don't know what to say," he began, his voice rough. You saved this company. You saved my family from my own son." He pulled out a checkbook. "Anything, name your price. A reward, a promotion, a new title, Vice President of Special Projects, whatever you want, it's yours." This was the moment of victory, the culmination of her struggle. The money, the title, it was all there for the taking. But Amina looked at the powerful, broken man before her and saw the bigger picture. A reward would change her life, but it wouldn't change the system that had made her invisible in the first place. Vengeance was easy, justice was harder. She shook her head gently. "Thank you, Mr. Croft, but I cannot accept," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Your money can't fix the problem." He looked confused. "What problem?" "The problem is a system that allows a person with my skills to be mistaken for a ghost," she explained. "The problem is a culture where a uniform makes a person invisible. A check rewards one person. It doesn't prevent this from happening again with another person, another clause, another language." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the silent room. "I don't want a reward," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I want you to build a system of review, a protocol of dignity. I want you to find the other hidden talents in this building, the people you overlook every day. That is the only payment that would honor what happened here today." It was an extraordinary choice. She did not ask for power or wealth. She asked for institutional change. It was a demand for soft justice, not for herself, but for everyone who was still unseen. Sometimes justice arrives without applause, not with a bang, but with a quiet, revolutionary request. Arthur Croft, SR, a man who had spent his life negotiating billion-dollar deals, simply stared at her, speechless. He had offered her a fortune, and she had countered with a demand for his company's soul. It took 3 weeks, 3 weeks of intense, top-down reevaluation that shook Croft Enterprises to its core. Arthur Croft, SR, true to his word, did not just pay lip service to Amina's request. He made it his singular mission. The first and most immediate change was the creation of the Clause 12 Protocol. It was a new, mandatory, and non-negotiable step in the company's due diligence process. All international agreements, without exception, now required a 3-tiered verification system for all translated documents. The first tier was the company's official legal team, the second was a contracted, top-tier international law firm, and the third, and this was Amina's specific contribution, was an internal, anonymous review board composed of a rotating panel of multilingual employees from various departments. No one would ever be able to hide a betrayal in the fine print again. But the deeper, more profound change was the launch of the Hidden Talents Initiative. Miss Gable, Arthur's formidable assistant, was put in charge of its implementation. An email was sent to every single employee in the Croft Global Network, from the mailroom clerks in London to the cafeteria staff in Tokyo to the janitorial team in New York. It was a simple, powerful invitation. The email announced the creation of a new, confidential database within the company's HR system. Every employee, regardless of their official title or pay grade, was invited to register their secondary skills, past careers, language fluencies, academic degrees, and professional certifications. A degree in engineering from a security guard, fluency in Farsi from a barista, a PhD in chemistry from a records clerk. The initiative's tagline, printed on posters that went up in every break room and service hallway, was simple: your title is your job, your talent is your value. For the first time in its 50-year history, the company was actively and intentionally looking for the value it had always owned but had been too blind to see. It was a seismic shift, moving from a culture that judged by uniforms and job descriptions to one that sought to understand the whole person. It was the beginning of the end of invisibility, and it was all because one woman had refused a reward and demanded a revolution instead. A month after the signing that never was, Amina stood in the boardroom. It was late, the sky outside a deep velvet indigo pricked with the diamond dust of city lights. The room was empty and silent. She wasn't cleaning. She was just standing there, occupying the space that had once been the site of her deepest humiliation and greatest vindication. She was reclaiming it in the quiet. The door opened softly, and Arthur Croft, S.R., entered. He wasn't in his usual power suit, but a simple cashmere sweater. He looked less like a CEO and more like a father who had been through a profound ordeal. He didn't offer a grand apology. The systemic changes he had implemented were his apology. Instead, he walked over to the window and stood beside her, looking out at the sprawling city. For a long time, they stood in a comfortable silence. It wasn't the silence of erasure, but of mutual respect. "You know," Arthur began, his voice reflective, "for 40 years I've built this company on one principle: trust, but verify. I verified every number, every contract, every deal, but I never thought to verify my own son." He sighed, a heavy, tired sound. "And I never once thought to look at the people right in front of me." He turned from the window to face her. "That day, you didn't just read the words. You understood the intent behind them, the nuance, the culture. Where did you learn to read a contract like that?" It was a simple, direct question, a question about her, and in that moment she let the mask of the maid fall away completely. "Cairo," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Before I came to this country, I was a senior partner at a firm specializing in international arbitration. My focus was corporate contract law between Middle Eastern and Western companies. I didn't just read clauses like that. I wrote them." Arthur listened, his expression one of deep, dawning respect. He wasn't just seeing the woman who saved his company. He was seeing the woman she had always been. In that quiet conversation, with no one else to witness it, her dignity was fully restored. It was a private healing, an internal closure that was more powerful than any public accolade, whose voice helped you heal when no one clapped. For Amina, it was her own, finally speaking her truth to someone who was truly listening. She was no longer defined by the worst moment in that room, but by the lifetime of excellence she had brought into it. The invitation arrived not as a command from the CEO office, but as a respectful, handwritten note from Miss Gable. Amina was asked if she would be willing to lead the inaugural workshop for the Hidden Talents Initiative. The topic was her choice. When she walked into the company's main training auditorium a week later, the room was packed. But it wasn't the usual crowd of executives. It was a vibrant cross-section of the entire company. She saw faces from the IT department, the catering staff, the security team, and the mailroom, all sitting alongside marketing managers and junior analysts. In the front row, looking proud and nervous, was Leo. Amina stood at the podium, not in her uniform, but in a simple, elegant dark blue dress. She was not there as a corporate hero, a poster child for a feel-good story. She was there as an expert. She didn't begin by telling the dramatic story of the boardroom. She didn't mention Julian. Her talk was titled Due Diligence as a Form of Dignity, Reading Between the Lines in a Global Workplace. For an hour, she held the room captive. She spoke about cross-cultural communication, about the subtle ways that language can be used to build bridges or create traps. She used Clause 12 as a case study, not for its drama, but for its technical lessons in legal linguistics. She treated her knowledge not as a secret weapon, but as a practical tool that everyone in the room could learn to use. It was a masterclass in competence. At the end of her presentation, she paused. "Knowledge is only part of the equation," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "The other part is courage, the courage to speak up, even when you're afraid." Her gaze rested on Leo. "And sometimes, the courage to listen to a voice that others have ignored. I want to publicly thank Leo Intern, whose integrity was instrumental in ensuring the truth was heard." The room erupted in applause. It wasn't for a savior, it was for a teacher. It was recognition done right, focused on her skill, her grace, and her willingness to share the credit. As she stepped away from the podium, Miss Gable met her with a warm smile. "You didn't just create a new policy, Amina," she said quietly. "You've opened a door for hundreds of people just like you." The new Employee Training Center at Croft Enterprises was a testament to the company's changed culture. It was bright, open, and collaborative. But the focal point, the first thing every new hire saw when they walked in, was a large, elegantly framed piece on the main wall. It was a high-quality, archival reproduction of a single page from a legal contract. On the left was a paragraph in English. On the right, the same paragraph in flowing Arabic script. It was Clause 12. Beneath the dual texts was a small, polished brass plaque. It didn't mention Julian or the failed merger or the billions of dollars that had been at stake. It simply read, "The most important truths are often the ones we overlook." The display was a powerful and constant echo of the story that had rewritten the company's DNA. It transformed the symbolic object of Amina's journey one last time. The document that had been carelessly dropped on the floor, contemptuously thrown in the trash, and secretly retrieved from a bin liner, now hung on the wall as a sacred text. It had started as a symbol of Julian's arrogance and Amina's humiliation. It had become a piece of evidence, a weapon of truth. Now, it was a permanent lesson in institutional humility. Did the object's meaning change for you too? It was no longer just a clause in a contract. It was a reminder that the most valuable assets a company has are often hidden in plain sight, and that sometimes the difference between ruin and redemption is the willingness to look in the places you've been taught to ignore. For every employee who walked past it, the message was clear. Look deeper. Listen closer. Everyone has something to contribute. Amina's quiet stand had been given a silent, permanent voice. Months melted into a year. The Amina Initiative was no longer a novelty. It was simply the way Croft Enterprises did business. The Hidden Talents database had become a vital internal resource, a go-to tool for managers looking to solve complex problems. Amina was still Amina. She had politely declined all offers of an executive position, much to Arthur Croft's initial bewilderment. Instead, she had accepted a unique, specially created role, internal arbitrator and special consultant. She still kept her locker in the basement. She still wore a simple, practical uniform, a choice she had made, a reminder of where she had come from and of the value of humility. But her security badge now gave her access to every floor, every room, every meeting. The final scene is one of quiet, profound change. Amina is walking through the executive wing, carrying a tablet. She is on her way to a meeting about a new venture in the UAE. A young executive, a sharp, ambitious woman in her late 20s, rushes out of her office, a stack of documents in her hand. She nearly collides with Amina. A few years ago, the executive might have offered a cursory, dismissive apology before rushing on. She would have seen the uniform, not the person. But now she stops. Her eyes light up with recognition and respect. "Oh, Miss Amina, I'm so sorry," the executive says, her voice genuine. Then she hesitates, a hopeful look on her face. "Actually, while I have you, do you have a moment? I'd love your eyes on this translation before I go into my meeting." I'm not sure the nuance is right. Amina stops, a small, knowing smile touching her lips. She takes the document. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, scan the page. The culture had shifted. The room had changed forever. She was no longer a ghost, no longer invisible. She was an anchor, a resource, a respected authority. She looks up at the young executive. "I have a moment," she says. "Let's take a look together." How many quiet revolutions are waiting to happen in the rooms we walk through every day? The legacy was not in a title on a door, but in this simple, respectful exchange. The work continued, and this time everyone could see.